Thank you, Laura, for being here with us. So, Laura is the protagonist of this feature, but she can tell us things about. So this is a process that started many years ago, because this is Adina's first feature. So the film I referred to before was a 50-minute documentary she made 11 years ago, and she has been working in this film for about 8-9 years. And when did you get in this process?
I'm one of the last people. I think I met Adina 2 weeks before she started shooting, and when Adina got in, not Adina, but she got in touch with some of the, because there are 5 different countries co-producing the film, and she hadn't got, my character was actually called Laura. It just turns out that I'm called Laura. But she's called Laura Hoffman, yeah, and I'm called Laura Benson. And so she was looking for someone, and so she asked all the different countries who were co-producing, because they hadn't found somebody either in Romania or Bulgaria. And so the French co-producer called Philippe Avril got in touch with the casting agent, who suggested several people, and I was one of the several people that was suggested. And I was asked to do I suppose what one would call an exercise. I read 5 pages on the film script, and I sent 10 minutes by internet. And then a week later I was asked to go to Bucharest, and I went and met Adina, and we had a full 5-hour interview, which was filmed, and she gave me some exercises to do, and she asked me lots of questions. And then and some exercises, and then a week after I got an email asking me if I'd accept to do the part.
And then, since then, how long did it take to make the movie with shooting?
I think it was over a span of 2.5 years, because there wasn't enough money, so it got interrupted, and so we shot something like, maybe she did 3 weeks in Leipzig, and then we did about 4 or 5 weeks in Bucharest, and then we didn't shoot for about 8 months, and then we did about 10 days or 2 weeks in Leipzig, and then we didn't shoot for 8 months or 9 months, and then we did another couple of days in Sofia. And we finished in July 2017, and it started in 2015.
And how was the schedule of the shooting? Did you so there was a script, but then did you shoot or in the order she had written that script? Did you change much of the script? Did you? So you told me she doesn't like the word improvisation, but were there many things added in the process of shooting?
There were a few things that were added. A lot was taken out, and a lot of things in the script was just a sentence. It was like, Laura invites Thomas round for a cup of tea, but actually, what would happen when Laura invited Thomas round for a cup of tea? There was no information. But
did she let you to do it, or she said, no, I want you to do this?
No, there was generally we worked on the circumstances. But what was actually going to happen was not predicted at all. It was really, I think what she really tried to do was to get people to meet each other from wherever they're coming from, and actually filming the encounters. So it's not predetermined.
And when did she decide to be also part of the film? Because, well,
what happened was that because the film got drawn out over such a long period, she actually spent time editing, and then she had like 8 months, for example. So she would edit with them. She had a huge amount of rushes, because we would sometimes shoot for like 2 or 3 hours. I mean, some of the scenes you've got maybe 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of the scene, but that comes from like 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours, and she would show what she had done, and she'd always wanted this. She uses the apparatus which you see in the film, which actually comes from teleprompters, which they use a lot in television when people read the news. And instead of it being the news, it's her face. So you're actually in a completely direct conversation with actually the person, even though she's actually in a different room. And when she edited it, and you know, she really wanted these discussions to really be, she wanted us to really be talking to the spectators, but when she showed it to people, she realized that it actually took people out of the film instead of drawing, and she really wanted to draw the audience into the film. And it had this kind of Brechtian effect of the absolute opposite. So she realized that in order to get people to stay in the film, that she would actually, it's a bit like a code, and like in theatre you have to explain the kind of code so that people don't think about what's going on and they kind of understand it. So she decided to film the apparatus which you see at the beginning and at the end of the film, and that wasn't enough. And she realized that then she actually had to show who was behind the camera, which meant that she actually had to involve herself in the film. And so she, you know, that was something that she really understood, that she had to be part of the process. She couldn't in the film remain outside of the film for the spectators. So the next part was also how she was going to bring herself into the film. So it was a long, I mean, I'll say, having watched or followed the procedure, I mean, she really, really worked hard in the editing room, because she edited all on her Todd, you know, de-rushing everything, and she really, really tried to understand. Lots of people said, oh, you should get rid of this, get rid of that, and she really, it was something she really chose that she wanted to do.
But did she show it to you while she was editing?
No, I didn't even know she edited on me.
Oh.
I found out at the end, because there are, you know, lots of things that she hasn't put in the film. And I only found out before going to film in Bulgaria, which was at the end, that she'd used my character as a kind of a thread through the film. But I never thought that I'd be the thread of the film.
And how did she meet these people of the workshop?
The workshop, I can't remember the name of the woman. She's called Julia, I think, and she does these workshops on body and emotion. And so she put an ad out. It was shot in Leipzig, and she put an ad out and asked people with disabilities and non-disabilities if they would like to participate in the workshop. And so what actually happens in the workshop, even though it was set up for the film, was actually a real workshop in terms of what's actually in the film.
Was there rehearsals also for the workshop? Or it was, so she just filmed the workshop as it went on?
No rehearsals.
No rehearsals.
No. No rehearsals.
And with your scenes, so at the beginning, I said you used to rehearse, or just she said, so that's the situation, you should do this and this, go ahead.
There was very
should.
little do this and this.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of crossing fingers.
Mm-hmm. But what did you want to put you in a position, in a situation with another person, and try that this meeting should be something spontaneous?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was, it was about, I mean, we worked a lot around before the scenes. Sometimes we talked till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But it was never, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, or it was, don't forget this, don't forget that. But it was never about you should do this or you should do that.
Did you ever feel a bit lost?
Oh yeah. I got really worried at the beginning because I wasn't aware of how much personal input I was actually being asked to put in. And when I got to Bucharest, I misunderstood, because she said there'd be 6 days of incubation. And for me, incubation is like when you have a premature baby and you put it in an incubator, and it's protected until you can take it out of the incubator because it's grown. And I had understood that we would use those 6 days to create the character together, so I didn't make any decisions about the character before shooting the film. I just read some of the books which are on the credits at the end, and we all read the same book, so we were all coming from a bit, having read the same stuff. And what I didn't understand is that incubator for Adina doesn't mean the same thing. So I actually started shooting on the second day, and I suddenly thought, my God, you know, I'm meeting these escorts, and God, what's going to happen? And so I said to Adina, I said, listen, I've really got to talk to you. And she said, okay, yeah. And I said, are you expecting me to sleep with them? And she said, Lola, it's as you want. I thought, oh, thanks. So it was, I did freak out, yeah. But I know that when you worry, the best thing is to ask the questions so that at least you get some of the worrying fantasies out of the way. So that was one of them.
Thank you very much for the movie. It was really nice to see. I'd like to ask if the things that the small guy told, I don't remember, I have a problem with Christian told, was it his idea or was that the script? The things he told about his eyes, the way he felt his body.
It's all him. She met Christian, I think, in 2013 in Berlin. There's a dancer who used to work with Pina Bausch that has a festival once a year in Berlin. I can't remember the name of the festival, and I think the title either of a workshop or the festival was about death and sensuality and sex. And it turned out that Adina and him did the workshop together, and they really got on. And I mean, I'd say Christian's a friend of Adina's. I mean, she started working with him before actually filming, and she's, done a lot of, she works a lot with Skype, and she gives you a camera, which is, she gives you a Blackmagic, it's a little camera, and she asks us, all of us, and she did that with Christian, who she met. Christian was probably the first person on board. And so she gave him a camera, and she would ask him to film things, and that really creates a relationship. And Christian, he was very, very motivated to do the film. He's a very active person in terms of rights for disabled people, and for him it was really important to be in the film and to express himself. And he considers, and it's true when you meet him, he makes you feel terribly comfortable. And he doesn't have a problem with his disability. And we have a problem with his disability. And he really wanted to switch that around. And he really wanted to express that he is a person that has feelings, that can do things, and that has desires. And he really wanted to change people's points of view on disability. And everything that he says in the film is his thoughts and feelings. And the fact that he's in the BDSM club is a desire on his behalf. He was very scared that Adina was going to just leave him in a kind of hospital, in the therapeutic, and he said, I'm not sick, and he actually says it in the film. He says, I don't want people to feel sorry for me, and I'm not a sick person. He was born that way, and he, at the age of 3, well, not at the age of 3, but when he was born, the doctors told his parents that he wouldn't live beyond the age of 3, and so his parents really tried to make every day a full, lively day, and he was brought up to take advantage and to live every day fully, because maybe the next day he would die. And if he catches a cold and stuff, he's very, very fragile. Sometimes he has to lie down if he's got too much water in his lungs, because he hasn't got a lot of muscles to cough and stuff. So he's always been in a kind of dangerous physical space, and has always, lived his life fully. And he, like he says in the film, he felt that he was just a head with a kind of body that didn't work until he discovered, that he could have pleasure from his body. So for him, it's a really, really important thing to participate in the film as a sexual being and not just as a handicapped person.
Hello. So I'm really confused about how to frame this film within my very, very poor cinema knowledge. Is this a documentary? It's very confusing because I can't see how the fiction line goes through it. I can see the very, very real bits of it that are all sewn together in a sort of script that isn't very recognizable as a dramaturgy. But yes, how would you frame this, if you can, if it's possible?
Well, I think I'll quote her because it's her that made the film. She doesn't consider the film as a documentary or as a fiction or as an experimental film. She really works on I think I'd say that the script was just a kind of a skeleton. When I read the script, it was just like a few bones, but there was no flesh, and it was like a trampoline. It was like a starting off point. It was like having a common space that we all started off from the same place, if you like. And from that, it's a kind of mix between, for example, one could say that it's documentary if you think of Christian, for example, because he's not an actor. There are lots of people who aren't actors. But like Christian says, I am acting in the film because he knows there's a camera, and he it's a kind of blend. It's like, if you take a piece of material and you take a bit of wool and you take a bit of silk and you take a bit of linen and you mix that together, that's going to give a particular kind of material. And it really is a mix, because what's true, what's not true after a while, you're in a kind of hazy space. Because, for example, if you ask a child to invent a story, they're going to invent a story, and that story is going to be invented, but in the story that child is going to invent, that child is going to talk about real things. So the fiction side allows for the non-fiction in a kind of way. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's a blend. And I would say that, you say that you haven't got a lot of cinematographic history in terms of a spectator, but that should make it easier in a way. The least references you have, in a way, would make it an easier thing to accept. Because it's true that when one watches, one wants to know, one wants to kind of keep control of, this is a story, this isn't a story, and when I watched the film for the first time, I felt that it was a really, I managed to forget about myself, which is quite a difficult thing to do when you see yourself on screen. And I really felt that it was an emotional process. I really felt either you resist it or you don't, and I can understand you do. But if you go with the flow of the film, I just think one lives through things and one understands, and one thinks, oh God, do I think like that? And oh God, and it's a kind of self-reflective space that the film puts you into. And the story isn't, as far as I'm concerned, it's not really about a story. It's about, I suppose, kind of fight for freedom on very different levels, and about questioning, what one projects onto people. For example, I would never have met Hannah in my normal life, and I would never have met. I wouldn't have met Christian. I wouldn't, and it was really nice to discover, because I didn't know what they'd shot in the film, so it was really nice for me to discover what they had done in the film, because I obviously only knew what I had done, and and my whole point of view shifted on BDSM and you know what Shawnee makes me do with the wrist, for example, and it kind of, I had these appalling nightmares. I mean, really awful. And I had 6 days off when I was in Bucharest, and I was given this camera to do these exercises, which they're not exercise, but it's like filming self-reflection, and it's a way of staying in the film and continuing your own kind of research on the subject. And I woke up with this appalling nightmare of being tied up naked like a chicken. So I don't know if you can imagine how comfortable that is. And next to me there was a guy dressed in black who didn't have a soul, and he was my torturer or whatever. And there was no way that I could get him to feel any empathy so that I could be untied. And I was literally thinking, how am I going to live until I die being tied up like a chicken? And I woke up feeling really awful. And I was staying, they'd moved me into this flat where I had this big kind of window, which was, it wasn't big enough for me to stand up and stretch my arms, but it was big enough for me to stand up and not knock my head. And I spontaneously put myself into the window frame. I filmed myself in the window frame. And I pushed against the window frame, the structure of the window. And it was like continuing the same exercise that I had done with Shawnee, but it wasn't having my wrist held down. And the fact of my having chosen to put myself into a situation of, how can I put it, of being imprisoned in a particular space. But the fact that I had chosen to put myself into that space was very empowering, and I screamed, and I actually got physical pleasure out of it. And it completely shifted my point of view on BDSM. And for example, Shawnee wrote an article which is called Conscious Kink Can Save the World. And he really does a huge amount of workshops on bondage, on lots of different things that I would normally never do. And it's about how you can actually release a particular energy in a particular space, which will actually shift that energy, which could be aggressive, into something which isn't. And it was really interesting because I had never experienced that before. And it completely changed my point of view on people's different sexual activities, which I'd always thought were a bit weird. And the fact that you're actually doing it in a very particular space, which is consensual and not dangerous, is a completely, it's a very, very powerful thing.
I really do not have a question. I guess I just want to say that I'm really glad I came to see this film, especially as a person who really hasn't had a sexual experience with someone else of any kind. It's a strange but intense exercise. That whole thing about things just are, it's something I've been thinking about lately. And I constantly throughout the film, I just kept, the exercise was just how do I position myself? How, watching it, how do I lie back, do I lie forward, do I cross my legs or not? And it's strange, but it's good, or not good, but interesting, and something I desire to have. And thank you, I don't know.
Just to bounce back on what you're saying is, what I like about the film is that it talks about how so many people can feel inadequate, and how much society has put pressure onto how one should be and how one is meant to be. And I think there are so many people who aren't, so to speak, that don't correspond to what society has said is normal. And I find it is a very relieving film in that sense. And a lot of people, you know, often when you do film and theatre, people come up to you and say, well done, or, you know, it's really great and stuff. And a lot of people had said thank you, and I really think that it's out of a kind of sense of relief that it actually, there was this thing that I think that society has used nature as a kind of, if you look at the animals, you should see how we should be. And like, animals are not homosexual, animals don't do this, animals don't do that, and that's the way one should be. And I found out recently that the BBC, when they did all these films on the animal kingdom, that they actually, you know, took out a lot of stuff. And apparently, I've never found it, but there's someone that got all the rushes of what they didn't put into the BBC nature films, and it would make one feel a lot better, because animals are very, very free. And society has really, and religion, and the way we've been brought up has told us how, you know, has invented this kind of scenario of how one's meant to be. And you know, lots of people are virgins at 25 and stuff, and they, you know, they think they're not normal. But it's only society that says that. It's not. And the fact that you're pressurized makes it even worse, because you think you're not normal, you think you're... So it's a whole system. No.
Okay, so I came by chance. I didn't know what I was going to see, and I like it very much. It's a rather special experience, and I have too many questions. So, is there any difference? The movie has been shown in several places all around Europe, at least. Is there any difference between the reception of the publics in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe? Do people?
I haven't been to it hasn't come out in every country in Europe for the moment.
Yeah.
But I'd say, for example, I've been to some countries, and for example, the reaction in Israel was, I mean, a lot of people left the room.
Right.
Yeah. And I was expecting, for example, in Poland, I was expecting the reaction, because it's a very Catholic country and there's a big rise of big right wing, and the Polish audience was really, really hungry and very, very warm and very welcoming. So it does change from country to country, yeah. But I haven't been to enough countries. I haven't been to, like for example, I went to Kiev, but it was at a festival, and I think festivals are, you know, it's slightly different because it's a particular audience, and but I do think, yeah, I do think, you know, this film in Africa would be very different from a film in Ireland, for example. You know, I don't know how it's been received in Ireland.
And in Romania?
In Romania, I think we did 3 or 5 at Cluj, at TIFF, the Transylvania International Film Festival, and it was really well received. But, you know, again, it's Adina's country, and it's a very lovely festival in this little town, but it hasn't actually come out on general release in Romania yet. But they were very, very warm welcome, yeah.
And last question. So you had no idea of what was going to be the movie in the end.
No. No, and I think probably unconsciously part of me didn't want to think about it, because it's the thing of if you're gonna. I mean, I do like adventure and I do like taking risks, But if I think about what I'm risking, then I'm not going to do it. So there's part of me that's going to avoid thinking about it too much. And I really, when I met Adina, I felt in good hands. And I saw the film that you gave her a prize, which is called Don't Get Me Wrong, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. I mean, I just thought I was so moved that she wanted to work with me. I mean, I just thought she was an extraordinary artist. So why would I say no, apart from being scared? And if it's about not doing something because I'm scared, I think it's a really bad reason. So I'm not going to look at the space of fear. And I think I felt that I was at a point in my life, because I'd given up acting for quite a long time, where I wanted to see how free and spontaneous I could be in front of the camera. And it was an opportunity for me to experiment that. And so, you know, I just threw myself into the deep end without, and I don't think Adina knew exactly what film she was going to do, because the film has got so much to do with who's in the film, because the material comes from the people that are in the film. So I think she knew what she wanted in terms of the process and the questions and where she wanted to go, but she had no idea of the material she was going to get and what she was going to edit and what she wasn't going to edit. And so I don't think anybody knew.
And you had no similar experience before?
Not to that point, no.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Pleasure.